Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Medley, and this is going to be our first article that we discuss for Psychology of the Adult Learner. This is Adult Learning Theories, Implications for Online Instruction article. And a few things before we get started. If you hear a dog barking, apologies. That is my miniature golden doodle, Beignet, and he's very sad that I have put him in his kennel for a little bit. um, I'll give you kind of the rundown of my goal for this discussion, and it's really to go through information about the learning theories themselves. This article is sort of two-part. It sort of puts the learning theories into the model of how it would be useful in an online instruction for adults kind of system. And I understand that you're in that system right now. And so it may be beneficial for you as a student, kind of making it really practical. And it may be really beneficial in your future as a potential adult educator to grasp the knowledge about the online instruction part. And it does make it very practical, which makes that much more usable in a theory kind of relating standpoint. But the real purpose of this article is to kind of get that basis of those online learning theories down really, really well. So this article is constructed where it's got some of the information at the beginning. I have gone through and highlighted some things for us to talk about. And so that's what our discussion is going to be about when you have kind of information that you'll be assessed on. Some of these highlights are going to be really important, but the whole article will also be important. So I suggest that you read the article before you watch this, and you watch any extra videos or other learning pieces before you come back and watch this video. So if you haven't done that yet, now is a good time to stop and go do that. All right, so as we're getting started, the beginning of this kind of gives us some of our information about which ones they've selected for us to look at. And they're kind of the bigger ones for us to go through. So what are we learning about here? We're really learning about behaviorism, cognitivism, humanism, and constructivism as theories. But they also add another one, androgy, which is interesting because it is not a theory. It's more like this idealized version of what adult learning theories should be. Not necessarily theories, but adult learning, what it should be, and sort of this area where we would hope for it to get to if it's not there already in our practice. And so, as the article continues on, they're talking about sort of like how big is this a problem? Learning about learning theories, knowing them, and actually applying them. And so, your article kind of goes into the why. Why are we studying this information? And so, the whole purpose that they would like to do, and it does make sense, is to close that divide between practice and theory. And so it makes sense to get those things closer together as much as possible. So as it goes on, it really talks a lot about why study those learning theories. Again, closing that practice is really important, getting us closer to a practice that is perfect in that idealized kind of realm. But making sure that these theories that a lot of times are really heavily focused on children's education, which of course needs to have a focus. But in adult education, we all want to learn new things. You're learning new things, but there's so many different ways that we continue as learners. Is that the same as childhood education is a question that we have. There needs to be more research about that, especially as things like online learning become much more popular and have really skyrocketed since the pandemic started. But learning theories as a foundation for our teaching, for our models of education, and how we got information out there is really important. And so our framework should reflect that. Our philosophies should reflect what's going on theoretically, but also practically. All right, so what your article is really doing here is they did a literature review and are giving you that information back to you over a 10-year study time that they were selecting. So when we look through these, we're looking at behaviorism first, and it does have some charts that are really helpful for us later about that. So it's one of the most influential learning theories for a lot of reasons. A lot of people simplify this particular theory down into we give a stimulus. So we ask somebody a question, we prompt them in some sort of way, and then we expect a particular response. And how do we make that happen? And so, yes, that is true, but there's so much more complexity to behaviorism. In all fairness, I was trained as a behaviorist, and so I have a lot I could talk about for this for a long, long time. You can think through your educational history and think through, how did I learn how to read? Well, someone said, yes, that's right. Move on to the next thing. And so you got feedback really, really quickly of someone told you to read something and sound it out. and you got feedback that that was right. You wanted to be right. And so you kept on learning like that. And so it was really interesting way for you to think through, um, I learned to read this way. Other people are learning to read this way. We've been learning this for a long time. You're being asked to elicit a response. When you see the letter A, you learned that it could be A or ah. And so there's so many things that are fascinating about those particular ways that we learn. Someone set up an environment for you to learn that well. And so that environment is the stimuli, but also that reward system, and consequence system is really in there too. And so when they talk about online learning, it's interesting because they kind of have the idea that online learning and behaviorism go hand in hand, because you might have repetitive behaviors that are asked of you in online learning, something like typing, something that needs pretty quick feedback, right? For you to know if you did well, if you beat your time last time, if you got the letters in the right order. And those kinds of things can give really quick feedback. And so online learning does those kinds of things, which is really interesting. So when we go into cognitivism, cognitivists really focus on different parts of the mind. How do we retrieve information? And so that mental process that the learner needs to use to solve a problem. And so there's a really good video that's posted, in the module, that gives an example of how a teacher is using that. And so they're giving sort of um, an acronym of how to solve particular math problems. And so it's teaching someone a mental process. And so this is how you can solve this problem now and in the future. And anytime you come up with a problem that needs this, this can be used. And so it's really focusing on the processes, and it's sort of aiming at being efficient in getting those things done. And so that's in a really interesting way. So cognitive often means our thinking abilities, our processes, intellectual abilities, those things. And so that's what that's about. So constructivism, I in studying childhood education, constructivism is always interesting. I can reflect on the times when educators use constructivism with me, and it's saying that you have to have mental effort and social interaction to really have full understanding of a problem or understanding of knowledge. And so they say that you really should have learning where other people are learning with you and you are applying concepts in some sort of constructing it way. And so I think of big projects. When I was a kid, we did big projects together, but as an adult learner, I've done lots of big projects. I think of how my brother uses this regularly. He believes you can learn anything from YouTube as an adult. And so he really kind of learned how to do construction and build a back deck. He put a roof on a pagoda kind of thing that he had at his house. And so you can teach yourselves things like that. And so it is learning through doing. And so you learn by messing yourself up, and you construct knowledge through kind of getting through those different things, which is really interesting. So, doing projects in a group, especially, you can learn from someone else's success or failure, and construct the knowledge that you need to be successful later on. And so, it promotes learning through use with others, as well as like sort of a task that's sort of oriented that direction. So, then the last theory, excuse me, that they talk about is humanism. So humanism is a little bit idealistic, but it sort of assumes that the purpose to learning is self-actualized, getting a person to be really independent. They use the word autonomous overall. And so in the world of learning, you have to have some independence, some self-reliance, some self-awareness about where you need to go and what you need to accomplish. What are those goals in your personal growth, in your personal potential? In order to meet those goals, what kind of steps do you need to do? And so it's really kind of assisting people in fulfilling those kinds of things would be kind of a role of an educator. And excuse me, this last one is, again, like we said, it is not a theory specifically. It's much more an idealized version of what education for adults should be. And so it is very much so related to humanism, and that there's principles that talk about adult learning situations. It is the only one that really is only adult. All those other theories are learning theories for anybody that's learning, whether it's children, whether it's adults, any kind of learning in that realm. And so adults need to feel respected. They need to feel supported. They need to feel accepted in those kinds of ways, which are important. And so in that realm, the educational journey is really more like provided guidance from the educator rather than direct knowledge is learn this, do this. It's really guidance that can be provided by those instructors. All right, so now the article really kind of goes into theory comparison. This is going to be hard to look at if you don't have it printed out or on your own screen, but I do like this chart, and so I would want you to focus somewhat on this when you're reading through. But I like that it has sort of the focus of the learning and the aim, as well as the role of the instructor. That's the most practical part of this because what do I do is the question that we have in the education world of what does this theory say someone should do in this. And so that last area, Androgy, is support. And so you're supporting the learner and whatever their goals might be, whereas behaviorism, it's creating conditions, that entire environment that surrounds the learner so that they are set up for the most success. Cognitivism is giving an organized way to think about the material so you can be successful in it. And then constructivism, facilitating and agreeing on meaning with the learner. So you're constructing that knowledge together as a group. And then humanism, again, like we said earlier, is very much so facilitative. So they're meeting their goals. It's a lot of self-directed learning in that kind of realm. So what you do is different in all of these. Now, one of those big questions is, well, how do you know which one's the best, right? And there's not a best, but to me, there are parts of these that are used in lots of different situations. Behaviorism is used in lots and lots of learning areas, but how you set it up for someone to be attracted to it might be different. How you are related to someone in an adult learning situation that needs more support or less support, it might be based on how much they know already or how motivated they already are without your help. How independent of a learner they already can be based on their abilities, their interaction with the knowledge, anything that they already have sort of foundational. That's sort of the benefit and the difficulty with an adult learner. They are coming to you with so much life experience and learning experience because by the time a person's an adult, they have been in education settings. They may have positive experiences with that or negative experiences with that. And so which one of these learning theories is best is a really hard question to answer, but it may be different in different situations. All right, so I liked that they started to compare some really interesting points of views between the learning theories. And so when you get down to these figures, they sort of go into the quadrants. I don't want you to focus too much on the quadrants, but I do want you to kind of think through when you look through of the four theories here, this model, Androgy model can be succinctly represented in four different parameters. So the instructor's view, presenter versus facilitator, self-awareness, more or less self-aware, type of learning, individual versus social, and domain learning. So I think that those are really four different areas that are really interesting to think about with the role of the instructor or us in many of those cases, us, the presenter versus facilitator role being highly practical way to think about these models. The self-awareness is really about our learner, and we won't know how self-aware they are until we get to know them. And so that's something that is a barrier for us that we aren't going to just immediately know with everybody. And then the type of learning, individual versus social, that's sort of a choice that we're going to have when we're setting up our adult learning situations. How are we going to facilitate that if that is one of our goals? And then the domain. Are we looking for cognitive kind of learning or affective learning? Is a question based on what the content is or what the style that we want to get out there for our learners is. All right, so it then goes into each of those again, core beliefs, implications, weaknesses. I think that they did a really good job going through and talking about some of the hiccups. They say weaknesses. And then these are really thinking about adult learning with online presence. When you think of online presence, you're in that situation right now, so it's very practical for you to think through that as well. When you think of behaviorism, they talk about the central premise is that learners can be conditioned to learn. And so you can be set up in a way where learning is more easy, more environmentally friendly for you to learn. learning through knowledge of results, reinforcing desired responses, and providing corrective feedback for non desired responses. I would like to know very, very quickly when something is out of place with me with my learning and that I'm doing something wrong. And so there are things out there in the world right now that, for example, some of my students, I'm a school psychologist, and they give IQ tests, so intelligence tests. There's new video response systems out there where they can upload a video of them giving it, and I can provide feedback on the actual video. It's like these little comments that go into the PDF file. It goes on top of the video, and I can really say, look, your hand isn't supposed to be placed there when you do that, or you smiled when they answered, and you're not supposed to do that. You shouldn't have a pencil in your hand right now, or you didn't turn the page fast enough or slow enough, those kinds of things. It can go immediately where that is. And so some of that online learning stuff with behaviorism, I can give the corrective feedback really, really fast. All right, so cognitivism, we're thinking about organized, structured, simple presentations. They want you to really understand the deep content, but also give you a strategy. I enjoy strategy based learning, and they believe that the learner can be extrinsically motivated to learn. Now, behaviorism also believes that. And so, when you see this, that means that there are external reasons why somebody might be coming to you, or you can provide external reasons to keep them coming to you. All right, so it does talk about being engaged in the learning process, whether their motivation is extrinsic or not, whatever's going on with their motivation, you've got to fully engage them. And so cognitivism basically says, yes, you can give them the tools, but if you don't make them use it, they're not going to, right? And so you do have to create a situation that forces the learner to be engaged. So how do you engage them? And how do you get them to continue to engage? So some learners will start engaging, but not continue. And so in cognitivism, you have to figure out, how do I get them to engage in that material? All right, so this kind of goes through all these models again with core beliefs, the critique, and implications. So I do like this. We're going to focus on, because we've talked about a lot of core beliefs right here, we're going to kind of focus on the critique kind of areas for a lot of this. But we're going to start with behaviorism right here, because we've talked about some of these here. But behaviorism will start here, and it relies heavily on the response of the learner. That can be difficult given what kind of situation you're in. Do you get to have assessment of that learner's product, whether it's verbal or like I do videos with some of my students, or some sort of answer system? That's the responses. If I can't give them something and they reply back, I'm not going to know if they're doing well and being able to move on. And so it requires sort of frequent responses for us to know what's going on. And in adult world, that's hard. So you may not have that frequency be able to happen that well. And so observable behavior is really important in behaviorism, rather than what's going on necessarily with them internally. And so, reading is one of those areas. Adult literacy is a great thing for us to teach, but adult literacy requires somebody to read out loud, because reading internally, I can't measure as well in behaviorism anyway. So that immediate feedback of reading or whatever else you're learning is important in behaviorism. So other critiques with cognitivism, it only focuses on the cognitive aspect. It neglects other parts of learning, which are important potentially, and places more emphasis on the instructors have to engage the learners. So the learners themselves don't have to figure it out on how they're going to do it. The instructor really has to teach them how to engage in that. All right, so moving on to constructivism, the learner's ability is really critical here to understand the content. They're going to build that and construct meaning out of what they're doing. So the instructor is going to create that task so that they could, but it is really on the learner themselves to figure it out as they're learning. So moving back up, we'll go up to Androgy. When we look at this, there is a big fail kind of thing that everybody talks about when we're talking about this ideology. It assumes everybody who's an adult learns the same way. And that may not be true. We need more research in this area, obviously, But it has a focus on intrinsic motivation, meaning the learner already wants to learn. That's why they're there. Learner may not be coming to you because they want to learn in a traditional way, or they want to learn how you want them to learn. They may be coming because they notice a deficit, or someone's requiring them to come and learn a specific skill deficit. It may just be because they don't have anything else to do and they're looking to learn as one of their hobbies. And so in those kind of worlds, that intrinsic motivation may not be powerful enough to stick with it. They may start but not stick. So the focus on intrinsic motivation to complete a task is a little difficult there. um, it kind of ignores that adults are different folks, and so adult A, adult B may look very, very different. It's not a theory, it is an ideology, and so most ideologies are going to be incomplete. um, the biggest tiff here is that it's not empirically based. And so what does that mean? That means that the research does not push this forward in our world. That doesn't mean that it couldn't one day, but it currently doesn't. And so, coming from a child education standpoint, there's a focus on empirically based. When we think about the adult focus, should it be empirically based? Well, it seems like as an ideology, shouldn't it also be empirically based? So that's a big question for us. Um, the prior conditioning of adults may not align well with the basic foundations here. When we think of what does that really mean? So conditioning to me means learning in a specific environment. So if you're thinking through, adults come to you with lots and lots of experiences, lots and lots of prior learning experiences. In that world, it is very difficult for us to say everybody learns the same. Well, they've already had learning experiences that oftentimes, if they're coming to you for adult learning, you may have some failure experiences built in there too. Now, you may know, I may believe that failure experiences are things that people really, really learn from. They may learn that they hated that. They don't want to do that anymore. And so those are things that we really need to take into consideration rather than thinking through that everybody learns the same way. Intrinsic motivation is a huge focus there, whereas extrinsic might be more powerful for somebody. All right, so it goes on to this next one with humanism. So we did it in this order because humanism is really that focus on the affective again, believing in intrinsic self-motivation. They're very similar, but it is theoretically based. It does think that people have an unlimited potential for growth, which is really nice. And the focus here is on behavior. So that's interesting how they're kind of focused on the affective more than cognitive and focus on behavior as well. All right, so constructivism down here goes through some more about it. You can see those highlighted areas and maybe kind of focus on those when you're doing your reading as well. Thinking through the student in constructivism, there's different projects out there that come to mind, but most of them are really difficult to think through of how a social activity would happen in most adult ed situations. So how could someone construct learning? Learning through projects like we're going to put on a play. We're going to make a musical. We are going to build some sort of thing and learn through as we do that. As we're building the thing, we learn how to use heavy equipment. We learn how to do measurements. We learn how angles work and the math involved in that. And so that's how we're constructing that learning through building a project all the way through. So as an example, they can be difficult. We construct things often in our lives, but it is difficult to think through how that might work in real world settings. All right, so it gives you more examples here specific to online learning, especially. And so you'll see similarities between these two. And it's interesting kind of going through what that might mean. When you look at online instruction and talks about future research here, I think these are great areas to do future research on and how people use theories in online versus face-to-face learning. You see that like a lot of self-directed learning is out there and those kinds of things. Self-directed learning is really not new, but it is new in how we are doing it in lots and lots of ways. And so excuse me, when you think of the instructor and their role and how the instructor's role in the learning theory and in the platform of what you're using, whether it's online or face to face, it may mean that there are different ways that you want to present your learning tasks and the ways that you want to attract specific types of learners that might fit in these models differently. It may be based on the level of the instruction that you need to. If there's more technical accuracy that needs to happen, you think of one theory more than another theory when you're setting up whatever kind of learning experiences you have for your learners and what kind of learning experiences you want to advertise, because you might get different learners that way. So future research, I think that online research, of course, is a great area to look at, but also how much of a course is based off of theory at all. How much of a program, how much of specific tasks are coming across in theoretical orientations or not. And then, of course, educators, I think, is really interesting for future research. Do educators know about theories? Do they know about the pros and cons of theories? Because they're not all perfect by any means. So as you're continuing to learn about this, focus on really how an educator might use this in any kind of adult education setting, whether it's online or not.